He is standing over me when I open my eyes. Still. Silent. The kind of man who does not need to fill a room. He simply empties it of everything else. Silver hair. Eyes that have watched 4 centuries pass like weather. And he is looking at me the way no one has ever looked at me. Not like I wandered in. Like I arrived. I am in his bed. His sheets pulled around me. His room smelling of cedar and cold stone, and something older than this estate, older than the city, older than anything I have a word for. And the single thought that rises through the wine still humming in my blood is this: he thinks I am someone else. He is wrong, and I cannot move. I cannot speak. I cannot do anything except lie there while the most dangerous man in all of Juneau looks at me like he has finally found the thing he didn't know he was missing. I should have told him right then. I know that now. I didn't. If you have ever wanted something you knew with absolute certainty you had no right to want, if you have ever felt that pull in your chest, quiet and devastating, that says stay, then you already know what kind of story this is. If you find yourself here, and you want to find your way back, subscribe. These stories don't always wait. I have always known how to make myself disappear. Not in any dramatic sense. Not vanishing into shadows, or slipping through locked doors. I mean the quieter kind of disappearing, the kind you learn when you are young and the world makes it clear, not unkindly, simply clearly, that you are the kind of person meant to move through rooms without disturbing them. I had spent 11 years inside the stone estate at the edge of Juneau practicing exactly that. I was very good at it. That is the honest truth. And if I had simply stayed good at it on the night of the autumn staff gathering, none of what followed would have happened. But Heloise had poured the wine, and Heloise had been pouring generously all evening, and somewhere between the second glass and the fourth I had stopped being Dahlia, who disappears and becomes something else entirely. Dahlia who stays. Dahlia who laughs too loudly at something Ren says across the table. Dahlia who accepts the 5th glass before she has fully finished the 4th. It was the dare that did it, really. Someone, I genuinely cannot remember, who said that I never did anything unexpected. That I was the most predictable woman in the estate. That you could set a clock by Dahlia. Quiet Dahlia. Careful Dahlia. Dahlia who has never once in 11 years done a single thing that surprised anyone. I felt that land somewhere it had no business landing. I took the wine. I stood up. I told them all I was going to find a guest room and sleep like a person of consequence for once in my life, on sheets that cost more than my monthly wage, and there was not one of them who could stop me. They laughed. I remembered that clearly. I walked out to the sound of their laughter. The estate's west wing was unfamiliar. I had no reason to go there. My work kept me in the kitchens, the lower corridors, the eastern service rooms. The west wing was for other purposes. For guests of a particular standing. For rooms that were kept in a state of permanent readiness for someone who had not yet arrived. Or so I thought. I found the room at the end of the corridor almost by accident. A door slightly ajar, warm darkness beyond it, and the cold blue of glacier light coming through arched windows that looked out over the channel where Juneau's waterway ran between the mountains like a secret the land had been keeping. I had never seen a room like it. Carved stone. Fur across the bed in deep, unhurried folds. The smell of cedar and something underneath it that I had no name for then. Rich and dark and old in a way that the wine in my blood found perfectly acceptable. I lay down on top of the furs. Just for a moment I told myself. Just to know what it felt like. I was asleep before I finished the thought. I did not hear him return. I did not hear the door. I did not hear anything until his presence entered my sleep like a change in pressure. Some deep, wordless part of me registering weight and stillness, and something that pulled in my chest like a tide responding to something it had no choice but to answer. I opened my eyes. He was standing at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, completely still, silver-haired, dark-eyed, wearing black that fit the dark of the room like it had been made for it. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on any face directed at mine, certain and quiet and entirely unshocked, as though he had opened this door knowing exactly what he would find. As though I was expected. As though I was known. My mouth opened. The correction was right there. I am no one. I am so sorry. I am Dahlia from the kitchens and I have made a catastrophic mistake, and please, please, Do not let this be the room I think it is. He spoke before I could. Latessa, he said. One word. Low and careful, like something he had been holding a long time and was only now setting down. And I, Dahlia, who disappears, Dahlia, who never does anything unexpected, Dahlia, who has spent 11 years making herself small enough not to disturb anything. I said nothing.
God help me.
I said nothing at all.
I have made mistakes in my life. Real ones.
The kind that cost you sleep for years afterward, that surface without warning in the middle of ordinary afternoons and remind you, quietly and without mercy, of exactly who you are capable of being. But I have never made a mistake the way I made this one. Because this one I made in silence. And silence, I am old enough to know, is its own kind of choice. He was still there when I woke properly. Not at the foot of the bed this time. In the chair by the window, one leg crossed, reading something by the pale gray light of an Alaskan morning that had arrived without any of the drama of color, just a slow, cold brightening over the channel. The mountains beyond the glass were the blue of deep ice. He looked like he belonged to them, like he and the landscape had reached some ancient agreement about permanence that the rest of the world was still negotiating. He did not look like a man who had spent the night in a chair watching a stranger sleep in his bed. He looked like a man who had done exactly what he intended to do. I pushed myself upright, and the movement caught his attention immediately. Centuries of instinct, I would understand later, that kind of awareness that does not sleep even when the rest of him is resting. His eyes found mine across the room.
Dark. Still.
That same quality of recognition that had undone me the night before, like he was reading something in my face that I did not know was written there. You stayed, he said. Not surprised. Almost relieved. And I was one breath from it. One sentence. I'm not who you think. I don't belong here. My name is Dahlia, and I clean the East Corridor floors on Tuesdays, and I am so sorry. That was all it would have taken. Instead, something else arrived. It came slowly, the way certain realizations do, not as a single thought but as an accumulation of details suddenly organized into meaning. The weight of the door I had walked through. The particular quality of the silence in this wing. The crest above the mantel that I had been too wine-drunk to register the night before. The smell of the room itself, cedar and cold and something living and ancient underneath it, something that the estate's other rooms did not have, something that spoke of a presence so old it had stopped needing to announce itself. His chambers.
His.
Restricted to all staff, without explicit summons. Violation grounds enough for immediate dismissal. And this was not dismissal territory. This was, my mind reached for the word slowly, the way you reach for something you are not certain you want to find. This was something else entirely. 6 months of political negotiation. An alliance between old bloodlines. A marriage arranged at a level so far above my station that the distance between us was not even measurable in ordinary terms. The word that arrived was treason. It settled in my chest like cold water.
He was still watching me.
Waiting. Patient in the way of something that has never needed to rush because time has always, eventually, conceded. I said nothing that was a lie. I want to be precise about that, even now. I did not pretend to be her. I did not perform anything. I simply did not correct him. I looked at him across that room, with that word forming and reforming in my mind, and I let the silence hold what I could not afford to speak. I said I should go. He said very little in return, but his eyes followed me to the door with that same unnerving certainty, as though my leaving was a temporary condition he fully expected to resolve itself. I walked out into the corridor, and kept walking until my legs decided for me that we were done. By mid-morning, the working rooms had done what working rooms always do. They had turned the night's secrets into currency. I caught it in pieces. A name, lowered voice, a pause when I entered a room that told me the sentence had contained something not meant for me. I gathered it the way I gather everything in this estate, quietly from the edges, without asking for more than what drifts toward me on its own. The Vampire King. Pierre. The Alpha King. Here for the Alliance. Here for the Princess. I sat down on a crate in the cold storage corridor and put my face in my hands and stayed there until the shaking stopped. She found me before noon. Princess Latessa was everything the rumors had promised, and nothing the rumors had prepared me for.
Tall.
Still in the way that power makes people still when they have never once had to apologize for the space they occupy. She looked at me the way you look at a problem that has inconveniently solved itself into a shape you can work with. She was not angry. That was the part that frightened me most. She was precise. She listed the charges the way someone lists items before packing, methodically, without emotion, making sure nothing was forgotten. Trespass. Restricted access violation. Conduct unbecoming. And then, last, laid out with the care of something being placed rather than thrown. Impersonation of a royal intended. She had witnesses. She had the night guard's record. She made clear everything she needed. And then she paused, tilted her head slightly.
Or, she said.
One word. The most dangerous word in any language, spoken by someone who already knows what comes after it. I looked at her face, composed, unhurried, watching me with clear eyes that held something I only understood later. She needed me.
Not saved.
Not forgiven. Not free. Useful. And I, who had spent 11 years becoming indispensable to people who would never once think to say my name in a room that mattered, I knew exactly what that meant. I knew exactly what I was going to say. I said yes. There is a particular kind of humiliation that only women of a certain age fully understand. It is not the sharp, hot humiliation of youth, the kind that burns bright and fades because youth metabolizes everything quickly, including shame. It is the slower kind. The kind that comes when you are old enough to know exactly how ridiculous you look, old enough to narrate your own disaster in real time, and yet somehow still unable to stop it from happening. That is the humiliation of sitting across a dinner table from a vampire king, wearing a borrowed dress that fits almost correctly, and staring at a row of silverware as though it has personally wronged you. Latessa's women had dressed me in the late afternoon. They were efficient and silent and treated me with the careful neutrality of people who had been instructed not to have opinions about what they were doing. The dress was pale gray with a high neck and too much structure. Not mine, obviously. Nothing about the evening was mine, and they had done something complicated to my hair that involved pins I could already feel loosening. One of them looked at my hands before they finished, and then looked away again without saying anything. My hands are a working woman's hands.
They always have been.
No amount of careful dressing changes what your hands say about you. I stood in the mirror for one moment before they led me out and thought, this is the most expensive lie you have ever told, and you haven't even spoken yet. Pierre was standing when I entered. That was the first thing. He was already standing, which meant he had risen when he heard the door, and that small, unremarkable courtesy landed somewhere in my chest with a weight it had absolutely no right to carry. I managed the doorway. I managed the first 3 steps. Then I said, Your Highness, when I should have said Your Majesty, and one of the attendants by the wall inhaled sharply, and I felt the mistake land in the room like something dropped from a height. I corrected it immediately, then knocked my elbow against the edge of the table reaching to correct that, and the water glass I caught in time but only barely, and only by making a small frantic grab that was, I am certain, the least elegant thing that had ever occurred in that room in its entire history. I straightened, set the glass down, did not look at him. Please forgive me, I said, to no one and to everyone, and mostly to whatever version of myself had thought this was survivable. There is nothing to forgive, Pierre said. His voice was exactly as I remembered it.
Low.
Unhurried, carrying no trace of amusement, which somehow made it worse. Amusement I could have managed. What I could not manage was this. He sounded as though he genuinely meant it. The dinner itself was an exercise in sustained, controlled panic. I know the forms of formality, the way anyone knows a language they studied from a distance but never spoke aloud, theoretically, poorly, and at full consciousness of every error in real time. I watched which fork he reached for, and mirrored it 3 seconds too late. I answered a question about the Eastern trade agreements with something so vague it barely constituted language, and then looked at my plate and hoped the moment would pass.
It passed.
He let it pass. That patience again. Not the patience of a man tolerating something beneath him, but something stranger and more unsettling. The patience of a man who is paying attention. who finds the thing in front of him genuinely worth watching. I had not been watched that way in a very long time. Perhaps I had never been watched that way. I am honest enough, at this point in my life, to consider that seriously. Then, dessert arrived. I do not remember what it was called. I know it was set in front of me in a small glass dish, pale and cold and dusted with something dark, and I know that I looked at it for one moment before I stopped thinking about what I was supposed to be performing and simply picked up the spoon. The first taste did something to me that I was entirely unprepared for. Not because it was extraordinary, though it was, but because I forgot for exactly 45 seconds that I was afraid. I forgot the silverware and the wrong address, and the glass and the borrowed dress, and the pins slowly losing their hold in my hair. I forgot what I was supposed to be and what I actually was, and the immeasurable distance between those two things. I just was. I closed my eyes without meaning to, made a sound that was soft and involuntary and deeply, deeply undignified. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me. Not the way a man watches a woman he desires, though I would not have known what to do with that either. The way a man watches something he has been waiting to see, recognition, finally confirmed. Something like wonder. Something like relief. He said nothing. He simply turned slightly and gestured, one small movement, to the attendant nearest the kitchen.
3 more dishes arrived.
Different. Each one stranger and more extraordinary than the last. He did not comment. Did not acknowledge what he had seen. Just placed them one by one in front of me. And watched me forget, again and again, to be frightened. I ate every single one. And somewhere in that quiet room, with the glacier dark beyond the windows and his eyes steady and warm across the table, something shifted in my chest that I did not yet have a name for. I should have been more afraid of that than anything else. I wasn't.
Not yet.
That was looking back where it truly began. Lutessa debriefed me the way a general reviews a failed campaign, with cold precision, zero sentimentality, and the quiet implication that the failures were entirely foreseeable and therefore entirely mine. The dinner had not produced the desired result. Pierre was not disinterested. Pierre was, by all observable evidence, the precise opposite of disinterested. This was a problem. The timeline was not flexible.
Her father was not a patient man.
And she reminded me, in case I had spent the evening forgetting what I actually was, had exactly one purpose in this arrangement. Make him end it. Make it his choice. Make it clean. She said it the way you say something obvious to someone who is trying your patience by failing to grasp it. I nodded. I told her I understood. I did understand. I simply did not yet understand that understanding a thing and being capable of doing it are two entirely different categories of problem. The first attempt had a certain elegant logic to it, in theory. Men of power, Lutessa had said, despise feeling like a treasury with legs. Be demanding. Be costly. Make him feel the weight of you as obligation rather than desire. I had practiced in the small room off the servants' corridor the night before. I want things, I told my reflection. I am the kind of woman who requires significant resources and generates significant inconvenience. My reflection looked unconvinced, but I pressed on. The morning walk through the upper gardens felt like the right moment. Pierre was beside me, close enough that I could feel the cold that lived permanently in the space around him. Not unpleasant, just ancient, the way a stone church is cold even in summer because it is holding the memory of centuries inside its walls. I drew a breath. I thought of Lutessa's instructions. I said, with what I intended to be aristocratic carelessness, that I had been thinking about jewels.
He looked at me.
What kind? He asked. That was not the response I had prepared for. I said the first thing that arrived. Something vague about color. He nodded once, in the way of a man filing information, and we continued walking. By evening, a small chest had arrived outside my borrowed rooms. Inside it, earrings, 3 necklaces, a bracelet set with stones the color of glacier ice, and a note in handwriting that was spare and precise and somehow, absurdly, exactly what I would have expected from him. Whatever you like. There is more if these don't suit. I sat on the floor next to the chest for a long time. Latessa stared at it that evening with an expression she did not fully succeed in controlling. "Be incompetent," she said finally. "Men find incompetence irritating. Make him feel the specific exhaustion of a woman who requires constant management." I went to bed trying to believe she was right. The piano was her idea. I want that on the record. The east sitting room had an old upright against the far wall, dark wood and ivory keys that had yellowed gracefully with age. Pierre had mentioned, offhandedly, that he had heard I played. Latessa had provided the answer before I could. Passionately, she had apparently told his attendant. With great feeling. Great feeling was certainly one way to describe what followed. I sat down. I placed my hands on the keys with what I hoped was the posture of a woman gathering herself before something significant. Then I played. What happened next could be described as music only in the broadest, most charitable application of the word. It was sound, certainly. It had rhythm in the way that a cart losing a wheel has rhythm, technically present, structurally catastrophic. I hit 3 wrong notes in the first 4 bars and then committed to them, which somehow made everything worse. By the second page, I had lost the tempo entirely and simply began making decisions based on proximity. I finished. The room was very quiet. I turned on the bench, absolutely certain that this was the moment. This was the thing that would finally produce the exhausted distance I needed from him. Pierre crossed the room, sat down beside me on the bench, close enough that I could feel the particular stillness of him, that quality he had of making the air around him settle. "In 400 years," he said quietly, "I have never heard anything quite like that." I waited for the rest of it. "You are," he continued, with complete sincerity, "the most enchanting woman I have ever met." I stared at the yellowed keys for a long, silent moment. "You're not serious," I said. "I am always serious," he said. And when I turned to look at him, there it was, that expression, that particular, devastating certainty. Like I was something he had been waiting to find and had found, finally, and was not the least bit interested in pretending otherwise. I should have gotten up immediately. I know that. The jealousy was Latessa's third suggestion and my own catastrophic execution. There was a woman at the afternoon gathering, Orinthia, some minor noble's daughter, genuinely beautiful, accomplished in the effortless way of people who have never had to try. I had watched Pierre speak with her for 10 minutes across the room and told myself, firmly and repeatedly, that what I felt was tactical. It was not tactical. When he found me by the window afterward, I said something careful and entirely unconvincing about how naturally his attention moved toward women of real substance. How that made sense. How it was fine. Every word of it landed wrong. Too careful, too controlled. The exact sound of a woman performing indifference she does not feel. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face me fully and said, low and without any of the patience stripped from it, "There is no one else in this room. There has not been, since the night I found you." The words arrived somewhere I had stopped guarding. I kissed him. I did not decide to. It was not a choice so much as a collapse, a long and inevitable giving way of something that had been under too much pressure for too many days. His hands came up to my face, careful and certain and warm in a way that made no sense for a creature made of cold, and for one moment the whole arranged and constructed and borrowed fiction of what I was doing simply ceased to exist. There was only this. Only him. Then I remembered. I pulled back, said I had to go, walked out with whatever composure I could locate on short notice, which was not much. That evening I sat in the small room off the servants' corridor and did not sleep. And in her chambers above, I was told later, not by her, Latessa would never, but by Wren, who had been outside the door with fresh linens and an unfortunate sense of timing, the princess lay staring at the ceiling with the expression of a woman watching a plan she was entirely certain of begin, slowly and irreversibly, to change shape. I wish I could say that made me feel better. It didn't, because I already knew, with the quiet and terrible clarity of a woman old enough to stop lying to herself, that what was changing was not just the plan. It was me. And there is no version of that realization at this age that doesn't cost something. I have learned over the years to distrust things I cannot explain. Not because I am a skeptical woman by nature, I am not particularly, but because the unexplainable has a way of becoming the unmanageable, and I have survived by managing things. By keeping the parts of my life I could control in careful, tight order, so that the parts one couldn't might at least have somewhere clean to land. The warmth in my chest did not fit into any of that. It had been there for days, and I had called it many things in the privacy of my own mind: guilt, proximity, the residual confusion of too much wine and too little sleep. I had been methodical about dismissing it. I am good at dismissing things I do not want to name. But you cannot dismiss a thing that moves when he moves. That pulls, specifically, toward a particular room in the north wing. That registers his mood before he enters a space, so that by the time he is in front of me I have already felt the shape of how he is carrying the day, and I am already, without deciding to, adjusting myself around it. That is not guilt. That is not proximity. I had no word for it. Not yet. I found Corva in the lower kitchen corridor on a Tuesday morning, doing what she always did, moving slowly and seeing everything and minding, as far as anyone could tell, absolutely none of it. Corva had worked in the estate for longer than anyone still living could confirm. She was the kind of woman who accumulates knowledge the way old stone accumulates moss, quietly, without announcement, over more time than most people think to ask about. I had always trusted her in the specific way you trust someone who has seen more than they say. I asked her carefully. Hypothetically, I described the sensation without naming it, without naming him, watching her face as I spoke. She listened with the stillness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this question. When I finished, she did not look surprised. She looked at me the way you look at someone standing at the edge of something enormous, when you are too far away to pull them back and too honest to pretend the drop is not there. That's a blood bond, she said. Simply. Finally. The corridor was very quiet. She told me what it meant. All of it. Not gently, not cruelly, just completely. The way it forms between predestined mates. The way it deepens with proximity. How it carries emotion bidirectionally once it takes root, so that his grief arrives in your chest as your own, and your fear finds him in a room across the estate before you have made a sound. How it cannot be reasoned away, cannot be waited out, cannot be unmade, without cost to both. She told me what it costs to break one. I stood in that corridor for a long time after she walked away. Long enough for the cold of the stone floor to come up through my shoes. Long enough to understand, with the full and unsparing clarity of a woman who no longer has the luxury of pretending, exactly what I had been feeling and exactly what it meant. One night. I gave myself one night to sit with it. I lay in the dark of the small borrowed room and felt him 3 floors above me. Not asleep, I could tell that much now, the bond registering his wakefulness as a low, steady hum, and I let myself, just once, just for those hours, not push it away. I let myself feel the full weight of what had quietly, irrevocably grown in my chest without my permission. It was, I thought, the most beautiful and most devastating thing I had ever held. One night. That was all I got. Latessa came to me the next morning with the particular composure of someone who has made a decision they find distasteful, but necessary. She sat. She folded her hands. She told me about the staged scene with the measured delivery of a woman describing logistics, a man already chosen, discreet and compensated, a specific room, a specific hour, and Pierre arriving at precisely the moment required to see what he was meant to see. I said no. I said it quietly, and without drama, the way you say something you have already decided. I watched her process my refusal and then, with the patience of someone who holds all the practical cards and knows it, begin to list what the alternative looked like. The charges again, more specific this time. What her father would do. What the King's Council would demand. Prison. Exile. Words that were meant to be walls and were. I said no again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward very slightly and said, with the precision of a woman who has saved her sharpest instrument for last, "He does not know you exist." The words were not cruel in their delivery. That was the thing about Latessa. She was never cruel for the pleasure of it. She was simply exact. She said what I had been saying to myself, in the dark quiet of my own mind, since before I could fully name what this was. You are a servant. He is a king. He is looking at a princess, and you are the woman wearing her name. The moment the name is gone, so are you. She said it all. Every version of it. Each one a sentence I had already written in my own hand and filed somewhere I had tried not to revisit. And I sat there, in the cold morning light of the estate, and I searched myself for the argument. The counter. The one true thing I could hold up against all of that perfectly reasonable, perfectly devastating logic. All I found was his face. The patience in it. The warmth. The way he had ordered more dessert without saying a word, just so I could forget to be afraid a little longer. That was not an argument. That was exactly what she was describing. A woman who had confused being seen for being chosen. Who had let warmth become weight, and weight become want, and want become something she had absolutely no right to be carrying. I had been saying these things to myself since I was young enough to first understand what I was and was not. Latessa had simply said them louder. And I who am old enough to know better, old enough to count the cost of things before I pay them, I had no answer that did not sound, in the end, exactly like surrender.
So I stopped answering.
And she knew, from that silence, what she needed to know. The thing I could not bring myself to say out loud, even then, was the one thing that mattered most. That surrendering the argument was not the same as not feeling it. That agreeing to do what she needed did not unmake the bond. Did not unmake what I had felt in that corridor after Corvo walked away, or what I had held in the dark of that one long night, or the way his wakefulness still registered in my chest like a second heartbeat I had not asked for and could not return. You can surrender an argument and still be destroyed by what you conceded. I knew that. I am old enough to know that. And knowing it did not help at all. I have done difficult things in my life. I have buried people I loved with less ceremony than they deserved. I have swallowed grief in rooms where grief was not convenient and saved it for later, and sometimes lost track of where I put it. I have made choices that cost me things I could not get back, and I have learned, the way you learn everything that actually matters, which is too late and all at once, that the hardest part of a hard thing is not usually the moment of it. It is the before, the walking toward it with full knowledge. I knew on the morning of the staging exactly what I was walking toward. That did not make me turn back.
I want to be honest about that.
I walked toward it anyway. That is the part one have never fully forgiven myself for. The east sitting room in the late afternoon held a particular quality of light, low and amber, coming through old glass that bent it slightly, so everything in the room looked softer than it was.
I remember noticing that.
The way the light fell across the floor in long, warm panels. The way it made the room look like something worth having. The man Latessa had arranged was standing near the window when I arrived. He would not meet my eyes, which told me he understood what he was part of and found it as comfortable as I did. We said nothing to each other. There was nothing worth saying. I stood where I was positioned to stand. I waited. And then the door opened. I had told myself in the days leading to this that I would not look at his face, that I would keep my eyes low and let the scene speak for itself and not give myself the additional damage of watching what happened to his expression. I looked. I could not help it. I have never been able to help it, where he was concerned. That is the honest truth of it, and I am past the point of dressing it up. He came through the door with the particular ease of a man moving through his own space, unhurried, present, already slightly warm in the bond, which was how he always arrived when he was coming to find me. I felt it before he appeared, that familiar hum lifting in my chest. Even then, even standing in that staged and ugly little arrangement, my body moved toward him at the frequency it always moved toward him. He saw the other man first. Then he saw me. There is a moment, between understanding and reaction, where a person's face tells you everything they would never choose to say. I watched it happen. The warmth still present in the first half-second. He had been glad to find me. I felt that. I will always know that. And then the warmth became something else. Something that passed through confusion on its way to a stillness, so complete it was worse than anger. He did not shout. He did not move. He simply went still in the way that very old, very powerful things go still when something strikes the deepest part of them. I told the other man to leave. My voice came out level. I don't know how. The door closed. And then it was just the two of us and the amber light, and everything I was about to do. I told him there was someone else. I said it straight. The way Latessa had coached, no excessive explanation, no apology that could be argued against.
Clean.
Final. The kind of thing that closes a door. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Then Pierre moved. Not toward the exit. Not in the direction of the rage or the cold authority I had watched him wield in rooms full of people with far more power than me. He moved downward.
Slowly.
With intention. He knelt. On the cold stone floor of that east room, in the amber half-light, this man who had survived 400 years of war and alliance and loss and power, this man went down on one knee.
And he told me.
Not performed it, not constructed it. Told me, with the plain directness of someone who has lived long enough to know that honesty is the only thing that costs enough to mean anything. He told me what I was to him, what the weeks had been, what it meant to have found something in this world that made the length of his life feel, for the first time, like a gift rather than a sentence. Every word was exact. Every word landed. I stood there, and I let them land, and I did not let myself move toward him, because I knew if I moved toward him, I would never do what I had come here to do. I reject the bond, I said. The words came from somewhere I have never been able to fully locate since. Somewhere below feeling. Below choice. The place you reach when everything above it has been exhausted. He was quiet for a long moment, still on one knee, looking at me with those dark eyes that had watched 4 centuries pass and had apparently, somewhere in the long accounting of all that time, saved room for this specific grief. I accept your rejection, he said. He rose. He straightened. He looked at me one last time with an expression that I will carry for the rest of my life, something that was not accusation and was not defeat, but was somehow more painful than either. Then he turned and walked out. The silence came immediately. Not the silence of a quiet room. The silence of an absence specific, shaped, the exact size and weight of what had been there before. The warmth in my chest went out like a light someone had reached into me and extinguished with their hand. I stood in the amber light of that east room, and I felt what I had done. Corva had told me what breaking a bond costs. I had listened. I had believed her. I had not understood. You cannot understand that kind of loss until it is yours, and then you understand it completely and all at once, and there is nowhere to put it. That night, the upper floors of the estate came apart. I do not mean that figuratively. I heard it from 3 floors below, the sound of something ancient losing its containment. Stone.
Wood.
The deep structural groan of a building being reminded it was in the presence of something it could not hold. The staff gathered in the lower corridors in silence, pale-faced, not speaking. By morning, Pierre was gone. 12 miles of old-growth spruce and glacial silence lay between the edge of Juneau and the true wilderness of the Tongass. Somewhere in that dark, a 400-year-old vampire was losing what remained of his reason, because I had taken the thing that tethered him and broken it with both hands. I spent 3 days barely present. Moving through the estate's routines by memory, by the mechanical repetition of tasks my hands knew without my mind's involvement. Eating because Ren put things in front of me with the specific firmness of a woman who has decided someone is going to be looked after whether they consent to it or not. Sleeping in short, shallow intervals that kept slipping off the edge of something I couldn't name. The void in my chest did not fill. It simply persisted. The shape of him, still there. The frequency still mine. Just silent. The way a room is silent after someone has died in it. Not empty. Something worse than empty. On the 4th day, I stood at the window of the lower corridor and watched the tree line in the distance and understood something I had been trying not to understand. I was the one who had done this. Not Latessa. Not the arrangement. Not the bond. Not the complicated machinery of alliances and bloodlines and power far above my station.
Me.
I had walked into that room, and I had broken something sacred, and I had left him in the dark of it. And every version of surviving that, every possible quiet, small, manageable future where I went back to being Dahlia, who disappears and kept her head down and made herself useful and forgot. Every single one of those futures required me to live knowing I had done that. I could not do it. I am old enough to know what I can and cannot carry. And I could not carry that. On the fourth morning, I went to the stables. The groom, Fun, looked at me for a long moment. Then he saddled the bay mare without asking me a single question, which is one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me. I rode toward the tree line. I did not look back at the estate. I did not think about what I was riding toward or whether I was equal to it. I thought only about the void in my chest and the man somewhere in that wilderness who was carrying the other half of it. He would not be alone in it. I had decided that. Whatever else I was or wasn't, whatever station, whatever name, whatever borrowed dress or wrong address or working woman's hands, I was his. The bond had known it before either of us had words for it. And I was going to find him, or I was going to stay lost with him. There was no version of this where I chose anything else. There is a kind of quiet that is not absence. I did not know the difference for most of my life. Quiet had always meant empty to me. The quiet of rooms I was supposed to move through without disturbing, the quiet of a life kept deliberately small so nothing would notice it and ask it to account for itself. I thought that was just what quiet was. The sound of a life not taking up too much space. I know better now. The estate in late autumn has a different quality entirely. The stone holds the cold the way it always has, but there is something underneath it now, something settled and breathing and warm at the center, like a fire that has been burning long enough to stop announcing itself and simply be. The spruce beyond the windows have gone the dark, dense green of deep winter approaching. The channel is silver in the mornings, the mountains above it carrying the first real snow on their upper ridges. I move through the room slowly these days. Not carefully, the way I used to move, that particular invisibility I had perfected, that practiced not quite there-ness. Slowly because I am 8 months along and my body has made certain decisions about pace that I am no longer in a position to negotiate. I have made peace with that. With the slowness, with the visibility, with the fact that I take up considerably more space than I used to. I am still getting used to that last part. But I am getting used to it. He is in the chair by the window when I come into the room. He has a document in his hands, something dense and political, covered in the small, precise handwriting of his counsel, and he is wearing the expression he wears when he is reading, which is focused and slightly severe and entirely at odds with what I know he is actually doing. He is watching me. He does this constantly and with absolutely no pretense of subtlety, and when I catch him at it, he does not look away. He simply holds my gaze with that dark, certain stillness and lets me see that he has no interest whatsoever in pretending he was doing anything else. 400 years old, and he has not learned, apparently, to be embarrassed about wanting something. I used to find that unsettling. Now I find it the most honest thing I have ever been given. I sit in the chair nearest the fire, a production, these days, that involves more negotiation with gravity than I would prefer, and he sets the document down without being asked. His attention shifts entirely. The bond confirms what his face already shows, that warmth that registers not as heat but as presence, a frequency that hums between us in the specific key that has been ours since before either of us had words for it. "How are you feeling?" he asks. "Like I am housing a person," I tell him. "You are," he says. Perfectly serious. I look at him for a moment. Then I start to laugh, which requires some management at this stage, but happens anyway. He watches me laugh with an expression that I have come to understand is not simple happiness, though it contains that. It is something older and more particular. The expression of a man who spent 4 centuries in the company of things that mattered less than this, and who knows, with a full accounting of all that time behind him, exactly what he is looking at. Letesse's letter is on the desk. I read it this morning. She is well. She is with Aldrich. She did not use his name in the letter, but she did not need to. I know her handwriting well enough by now to hear what she leaves out as clearly as what she puts in. The alliance holds, reshaped around a different architecture than the one her father had drawn, sealed with treaties that carry my name now and not hers. There had been difficulty, at first. Her father had been, as anticipated, a man of strong feelings about disrupted plans. But Pierre is 400 years old and has negotiated with men of strong feelings before, and he is, I have learned, considerably more formidable in a room of political consequence than anyone who has only ever seen him in private would think to expect. The alliance held because he made it hold, and he made it hold for reasons that had nothing to do with Letessa, and everything to do with the fact that this is his home now, and I am in it, and that is not a thing he will allow to be made precarious. He told me that plainly. He says most things plainly. It is one of the things I love most about him, that he has lived too long to waste words on indirection when directness will do. I wrote back to Letessa last week. It took me 3 attempts to find the right tone, not warm in the easy sense, because what passed between us was not easy, and I am not willing to paper over that for the sake of convenience. But honest. We are women who understand each other in the specific, complicated way of people who were briefly each other's obstacle and have arrived, on the other side of it, at something that resembles respect. I sealed it and sent it and felt, when it was gone, something close to finished. The fire has settled into the low, steady burn of late evening. The glacier light through the old stone windows has gone the deep blue of full dark, the channel invisible now beyond the glass, the mountains present only as an absence of stars along the horizon. The bond hums. It does this always, not urgently, not with the desperate insistence it had in those early weeks when neither of us understood it, and it was trying to make itself known anyway.
Steadily. Consistently.
The way a heartbeat hums, present and unremarkable and quietly, absolutely essential. I put my hand on my stomach, where our child is currently engaged in what I can only describe as a structural renovation. Pierre is beside me before I complete the movement. That is also something he does, arrives somehow, precisely when he is needed, without fuss, without announcement, simply there. He places his hand over mine, that familiar cold that has never stopped being a comfort to me, the coolness of something ancient and steady against the warmth of my skin. We sit in the firelight, and we do not say anything for a long time, because there is nothing that needs saying. That is the thing about genuine quiet. It does not need filling. It is not absence pretending to be peace. It is the real thing, the quiet of a life that has found its weight and settled into it and does not need to apologize for taking up the space it takes. I think about the night I walked into this estate's wrong wing, with wine in my blood and a dare in my chest and absolutely no idea what I was walking into. I think about lying down in his bed not knowing it was his, not knowing what any of it would cost or become. I think about the woman I was then, practiced at disappearing, fluent in smallness, certain in the quiet and unflinching way of long habit that she was not the kind of woman things happen to.
She was wrong about that. I was wrong about that.
Things happened. The most significant things of my life happened, and they happened in this house, and they cost more than I knew how to calculate when I was in the middle of paying for them. The staging and the bond and the breaking and the wilderness at midnight and the moment in the dark of the Tongass when I found him and understood, all at once, that some things are worth the whole price. Every bit of it. You're thinking loudly, Pierre says, without opening his eyes. I'm allowed. I say. I live here. A pause. You do, he says quietly. And the way he says it, not as confirmation, not as reassurance, but as simple and complete fact, reaches somewhere in me that is still, even now, still learning to believe it. I lean against him. His arm comes around me, careful and warm and certain. Outside, Juneau holds its dark. The mountains hold their snow. The old stone walls of the estate hold everything inside them, the fire, the light, the bond still humming in its steady, unremarkable, essential way. He thought he knew me, that first night. Standing over me with that silver-haired certainty, looking at a sleeping woman in the half-dark and believing he recognized her. He had the name wrong. He had everything else exactly right. And I, who spent the better part of my life making myself small enough not to be found, was found anyway, in the most accidental, disastrous, irreversible way imaginable. I am still getting used to being known. I am, at last, no longer trying to get out of it. Some things, once broken, teach you what they were made of by the way they hurt when they're gone. If this reached something in you, if you felt the weight of it, stay. There are other women in these stories. Other loves that cost everything. Subscribe so you don't lose your way back to them. These moments don't always wait.